Hello, it's late winter, very early spring, and I'm in the middle of pruning my collection of Buddleias, also known as a butterfly bush. And in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to prune a Buddleia and also share with you some interesting facts and some hints and tips for the care and maintenance of this plant. And of course, it's known as a butterfly bush because it's so effective at attracting butterflies to the garden with these beautiful, sweet smelling blossoms. And that clearly is a blossom from last year that's been allowed to go to seed. These seeds are useful because they produce food for birds and rodents in the wintertime. But because it produces so many seeds, it is seen as quite an invasive species of plant. And in fact, in some states in America, it's illegal to plant Buddleias. And so some clever scientist has come up with an infertile variety which can't reproduce itself. Whilst we're down here looking at these blossoms, it's worth noting that they are produced at the end of every branch. That's important because it informs how and why we prune the Buddleia. If the Buddleia was to be left unpruned, it would continue growing skywards, and those blossoms would be high up in the air, out of sight and out of reach, and we wouldn't get to experience that beautiful scent it produces all through the summertime. So we prune it back. Another benefit from pruning it back is these can become quite tall and willowy and leggy, and they can suffer from wind damage. So by keeping it slightly more compact, we're helping to protect the plant. Most Buddleias flower at the very tip of the branch, as do mine. There are a couple of varieties, however, that do flower on the second year's growth. So if you're not sure which one yours is, and mine, the evidence is pretty clear, only prune half the branches out. That way you'll be guaranteed some blossom. Pruning the Buddleia is quite a straightforward job. I've got some tools here. Now, I'm clearly not going to need my heavy duty ratchet loppers with these plants because these have been well managed over the years and they've only got small branches. However, if you've got a big plant that hasn't been well managed, it's interesting to note that the bigger plants are less tolerant to pruning. So if you've got a big specimen that hasn't been pruned over the years, take a slightly different approach so that you don't shock the plant too much. And what I mean by that is consider taking only half the branches out and leave the other half on the plant so the plant can recover. Pruning is quite a simple, straightforward affair, but it does look pretty brutal. I'm not going to need these. I will get away with smaller loppers and possibly some hand secateurs. If you've got huge, thick, woody stems at the bottom of yours, you might need a pruning saw. So, as I've already said, late winter, early spring, when it's showing signs of new growth, which you can see here. First thing I'm going to do is bring it under a little bit more control. I shall finesse the pruning when I brought it down a few feet. Now, I don't know where you are in the world watching this, but in the UK we're at the tail end of a series of pretty strong storms and the winds are still quite strong. So I'm pruning this upwind so that the branches blow off in that direction, not in my face. So I'm just tidying this down and bring it under a little bit more control before I start to finesse the pruning. It looks severe, it looks brutal, but because these have been managed and they're used to pruning, it won't do them any harm. In fact, it'll do them a lot of good and they'll appreciate it. So there's a plant being brought under control by a bit of judicious pruning at the top. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out all the dead wood, because that's no use to anyone. It stops the air from circulating around the plants. So anything that's dead or that's overlapping or rubbing against another branch, take it out. So you're thinning it out of anything that looks diseased or dead or old or that's in the way. So now that I've brought that under control, I'm at the stage where I'm going to start taking a little bit more care over the pruning. And I'm going to bring this plant down to somewhere between 30 centimetres and 60 centimetres, between 1 and 2 feet in old money. And I'm going to prune it down to where I see evidence of new growth. And where I prune it, that new growth will become a new branch which reaches skyward, and at the end of that branch we'll have some lovely blossom. So let's get in now and do a bit more pruning just above where I see evidence of new growth. So there we go, one neatly pruned Buddleia brought back well and truly under control. 2 down, 3 more to go. And I'm looking forward to late spring, early summer, when these start to produce blossom, which will invite some beautiful butterflies into the garden. And I suppose that does beg the question, why would you invite butterflies into your garden when they produce caterpillars which might eat your crops? And to me, the answer to that question is because it's all about the bigger picture. We need to create a diverse ecosystem. It's all about biodiversity. If you support every level of the food chain, you'll end up with a much healthier garden all around. The eggs and the caterpillars provide food for the birds, the frogs, the toads, the newts, and so it goes on. And incidentally, the Buddleia is not actually a host plant for butterflies. What I mean by that is the butterflies don't actually lay their eggs on the Buddleia. They'll lay their eggs on a plant nearby. So it's worth considering, if you want a wildlife garden, having something like nettles around your Buddleias, and that will help with that whole life cycle of the butterflies. Another thing you can consider doing, which is highly favourable for biodiversity, is to not keep too tidy a garden. And what I'm doing here is I'm leaving a pile of these Buddleia cuttings, including all the seed heads, on the ground in contact with the earth. And this will be beneficial in so many ways, because it's not just the wildlife that you can see, it's the wildlife that will inhabit underneath this pile, which is also beneficial. And because this is a mix of brown and green, in other words carbon and nitrogen, it's a good mix of elements which will help it to compost down even sooner. Compost, of course, is the result of all those bacteria working on this green matter. And I know that in 6 months' time, if I were to turn this over, there'll be thousands of different invertebrates underneath here, all adding to the overall biodiversity of my garden. And I'm really quite excited about this year, when I put the bog garden and the wildlife pond and the beehive and the log pile and the wildflower meadow in this far corner. And thinking back to my O-level biology, the smaller I can chop these pieces into, the better, because it will mean that each piece will have a higher surface area to volume ratio, and that will make it easier for things like bacteria and mold to impregnate each piece. Having said that, I do want to leave gaps so that air and creatures can get in and inhabit it. And if you want to see how all these projects pan out, subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications bell. Also comment below, because it's always nice to hear from you. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope it's been useful. I'll put all the hints and tips in the description box below this video, and I'll see you soon.